Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the presentation of the Borough of Queenscliff's draft budget for 2022-2023. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands, waters and skies, the Wadawurrung people. We pay our respects to their past and present elders and their emerging leaders. I also extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, including any Aboriginal people who may be with us today. Tonight, Council staff will be sharing the details of our draft budget for the coming financial year, including some of the modelling that shows how we will maintain a financially sustainable borough into the future. But as I've said before, a council's budget isn't just a reflection of our finances, but it's also a reflection of our priorities. Last year, we worked together as a community during an intensive engagement process to create a council plan full of our shared priorities for the borough. As the first budget since that plan was finalised and adopted, this budget begins the important work of funding and implementing our shared priorities. Thank you to everyone in our community who took part in this engagement process and helped us create a clear path forward. Responding to climate emergency is a major priority for Council, and this budget provides funding support for our commitment to reduce our community's impact on the environment. With both operational and capital works funding for energy efficiency projects, this budget will help Council and our community reduce energy, waste, emissions and costs. Our council plan also calls on us to improve the way we celebrate the borough's diversity and reconciliation with the borough's traditional owners, the Wadawurrung people. This is certainly overdue and an important piece of work for council. This budget funds a reconciliation plan and new Wadawurrung signage throughout the borough to ensure we can better celebrate and acknowledge our community's rich Aboriginal history. Our community can't be inclusive of everyone without being accessible to everyone, and through this budget, Council will invest in modern and accessible public facilities for the borough. Sustainable funding to upgrade, build or construct brand new public toilets throughout the borough will make our public spaces more accessible to not only our eldest and youngest residents, but everyone, and also those with accessibility needs. From supporting community wellbeing to protecting our environment to developing a prosperous and diverse economy, this is a budget that begins delivering on the council plan that we have put together. As you will have heard me say a number of times now, however, this is a draft budget. Before councillors endorse this budget and financial plan, we want to hear from you. At the end of this presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions of any of our panellists, and would also encourage you to make a submission if you had feedback or anything you hear today. This is a budget that builds on the council plan we created together, and community feedback remains an essential part of the budget process. Now, to begin the main show of the evening, I'll hand over to our Council CEO, Martin Gill. Martin will be talking through some of the major capital and operational initiatives funded in this budget. He'll be followed by Council's financial mastermind, Gihan Kawabunji, who will explain the financial projections and expectations built into this budget. We'll also hear from Council's Manager for Infrastructure and Environment, Stuart Hanson, to talk through some project-specific details of the budget. And our Communications Coordinator, Connor Parker, will also explain how you can make a submission, and he will also moderate the Q&A session. I'd like now to hand over to Martin Gill, our CEO, and I'm delighted, Martin, to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So hello and welcome everyone, and thank you for attending the budget presentation. My name's Martin Gill. I'm the CEO here at the Borough of Queenscliff. Much of what Council does, we do every year. Administration of legislation, renewal of assets, picking up waste, and as such, much of our budget is allocated to funding these activities. There is, however, occasionally an opportunity to consider new initiatives that might further the objectives of the council plan, meet a new service demand, or address an infrastructure gap that our community has brought to our attention. And these are included in the budget as new initiatives. And generally, these new initiatives fall into two categories: operating initiatives, projects that relate to existing programs or further planning that council has already done, or actually undertake planning for future capital projects. And then capital initiatives or capital works. So these are projects that generally create new assets or upgrade or renew existing assets. So I'm going to run you through a couple of those major initiatives in this budget. And the first one is a new operating initiative, which is the Coastal and Marine Management Plan. And council has allocated a budget of $210,000 to this project. Now, it's money that has been carried by council for a number of years, but in response to community feedback on the draft Coastal and Marine Management Plan and the release, finally, of the drafting guidelines by the state government, council is now preparing a framework to develop the next version of the plan and to take the project through to completion. The funds allocated in the draft budget will allow council to appoint a project manager who will work with a steering committee to oversee the preparation of the next version and then take it through another round of community consultation. In the slide on the screen, I've included a diagram which we're working through with the councillors, which shows the proposed project structure and framework for that. If the funding is included in the budget, and the project of recruiting a project manager and recruiting a community representative steering committee will commence in early July. The Mayor's already mentioned the commitment that this council's made to the implementation of the Clyde Emergency Response Plan. And in raw figures, that's a $107,000 a commitment in the draft budget. Some of the key projects that we've identified and we're working with council on are some upgrades to a council asset in the community Queenscliff Neighbourhood House and doing an energy upgrade following some energy audits. Ongoing education audit programs, and we'll do those in collaboration with community and community groups, and also the people who are representing the different, or who lease and represent the different buildings that we look after. And as the Mayor also mentioned, a very important piece of work, the reconciliation plan, which we are all looking forward to participating in. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new capital projects. And as many of you are aware, and those that are attending, I'm sure, are interested, council's in the process of completing a number of significant capital projects in the borough. So this year's proposed new capital projects reflect this set of circumstances, and council has identified a modest list of projects or construction projects that it will undertake in addition to the works that are already underway and that we want to finish in the next financial year. The most significant project in our capital works program will be the new public toilet for Queenscliff Shopping Village. So this is a new toilet facility that will complement the new toilets at the Q Hub. Council is still investigating the final location of the facility, but it will be in Hobson Street, close to the intersection of Hesse Street. So the feedback we've got from our community generally is that that's a location they would prefer. So we'll work with surrounding landowners to make sure that we find a site that is visible, easily accessible, and best meets the purpose of the facility itself. And we'll do that again. If council adopts the budget in June, we'll start that work in July. Two other capital initiatives that council have identified, the new fence at the Dog Beach and some drainage works at Edgewater Close in Queenscliff. So many of you will know council is currently working with DELP on some geotechnical studies around the erosion at the Dog Beach. And while the findings of that coastal process has an option assessment are not yet known, one of the options recommended for detailed assessment is the extension of the fencing. Council has been advised, however, that there is currently no state government money in the 2022-23 state budget available for any works that might be recommended through the geotechnical assessment. So Council's really allocating this money as a contingency to make sure that if the recommendation does come through, that we're there to support the state government and undertake those works to continue to manage the community's expectations around that space. The project at Edgewater Close is a project to really rectify a localised flooding risk. And there are parts of Queenscliff that are very low, and this area around Edgewater Close is low. And so water does pool after significant rain events. So this is a small project to insert some infrastructure that will help get the water away so it doesn't sit. I'm going to finish with just reflecting on what we spoke about earlier about the fact that we are going to continue to finish projects that are underway. And I mentioned earlier a number of those construction projects that we'll continue to work on. Projects by design can span a number of financial years, and that's generally about the fact around the complexity of a project, but it also can be external factors. And so the projects that we've listed here are projects that have taken a number of years, but so we continue to allocate budget money to them, and they'll be finished during 2022. So the Queenscliff Hub, which we hope might even be finished before the financial year, but we've got our fingers crossed. The Queenscliff Sport and Recreation Precinct, including the new amenities block, which is underway and under construction now, and the works at the P1 huts, we're just about to go out to tender for, which is an exciting project. After a number of years, we've got to a point where we're actually going to achieve something. And of course, the most exciting project for all of us is our ICT upgrade, which we just can't get enough of. That's it in terms of the new initiatives. And as I said, a very modest group of projects, but it does reflect where we are as an organisation and the fact that we do have a number of projects on our books that we want to complete. And we need to keep working on planning for the future. So with that, I'd really like to hand over to Gihan Kobahanji to present the full and detailed draft budget. And thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Right, let's take next like 20 to 30 minutes to go through the financials summarized in our draft budget 22-23. The draft budget has been prepared under a couple of assumptions. The most critical one is that as we emerge from the economic conditions influenced by COVID, we are anticipating a return to normal revenue and expenditure level. However, there are some areas in the operation where that is not the case. Those have been noted in assumptions within the budget papers. Right, keeping that in our mind, 22-23 budget at a glance. It's a break-even budget of 16.3 million. Operating expenditure budget of 12.5 million and capital work program of 3.8 million. 397,000 for operating initiatives and 315,000 for new capital work programs. The budget includes a rate increase of 1.75%, and there is a 3.5% increase in waste management charges for a residential property. There are no borrowings included in the draft budget, and council will continue to have a debt-free balance sheet. Right, let's look at the details of some of those key elements in our draft budget. In total, we expect to receive 11.1 million as operating income in 22-23. 74%, that is 8.1 million, from rates and waste management charges. Another 17%, 1.9 million from user fees and charges, and mainly income from our tourist park. 0.6 million operating grant. However, 22-23 operating income is underestimated due to early receipt of financial assistance grant. Every year we receive closer to 500,000 from the Commonwealth government to fund our ongoing operation. So what happened? We received the full allocation for 22-23 in the current financial year. So if we consider the financial assistance grant of 22-23 as well, then the operating income for 22-23 would have been 11.6 million. Sorry. Have a little technical glitch. That's fine. Thank you. Sorry for that. The rates, 6.9 million income from rates. This does not include waste management charges. The rates alone accounts for 63% of our operating income. If we compare with 21-22 actuals, we see 2.1% increase. And again, we may wonder whether this is right. But to check the compliance with the annual rate cap, we need to compare with 22-23 rates with annualized rates for 21-22. So we adjust right, got it. So we adjust rate income for the current year with the annualized value of supplementary rates to arrive at total annualized rate for the current year. So we have raised supplementary rates during the year due to various property development. And the supplementary rates do not represent rates for a full year. So we have to annualize them. So in other words, this total annualized rates for 21-22 represent the total rates we would have raised at the beginning of 22-23 if there had not been any increase in rates. So when we compare the increase against the annualized rates, it's an increase of 1.75%. Right, now we know the total rates for 22-23. So let's see how rates on an individual property is calculated. Because some of us think that property value determine the amount of rates council rates, but that is not true. In the previous slide, we have already looked at total rates income for 22-23. To do that, we did not look at the property valuation at all. So once the council has determined the total rates within the rate cap, council need a vehicle to distribute that rate across all the properties in the municipality. For that purpose, all councils use property valuation. So how do we do that? First, we determine the total rates within the rate cap. And then we divided the total rates by the combined value of all rateable properties in the municipality to arrive at rate in the dollar. Then we apply that rate in the dollar to value of each property to determine how much rate that each property has to pay. So due to this method of calculating rates, the valuation movement do not result in overall increase or overall decrease in income to the council. The change in the valuation will only impact the amount of rates payable by each property. So in other words, the change in valuation will only impact this process from this point onward. Does not have any impact on the revenue, the rates revenue of council. Right. Based on the provisional valuation data we have received from the Valuer General, there is a 35% average increase in the value of residential properties across the borough. Yes, it is a very significant increase. Now let's take a couple of examples to understand how this impacts rates payable by each property. Right, let's assume all of these properties are valued 1 million for 21-22. Look at this property. The value has gone up by 35%. So which is in line with that average increase of 35% that we saw in the previous slide. So as a result, this property will pay 1.75% extra rates in 22-23, though there has been a 35% increase in the value, because the increase in the value is in line with that average increase. So because of that, that property will only pay that increase in line with the rate cap. What about this one? The increase in the value of this property is 40%. So it is more than the average increase of 35%. And as a result, the increase in the rates are also more than the average. If the increase in the valuation is lesser than the average, or as with these cases, then you will pay at a lower than the average increase, or even reduce rates for 22-23. So as we just saw, so due to valuation movement, some properties will pay more and others will pay less compared to that capped rate increase. Net impact to the council is 0. And again, this is nothing to do with the rating strategy that the council has. And this is purely because of the way the value of each property has moved compared to the previous valuation. Right. So this is a quick comparison of rates payable for 22-23 in each G21 council. So we have selected a property valued 1 million for this comparison. However, we have to keep in our mind, such a direct comparison of the rates may not be 100% accurate, because there are various factors influencing the rate income of each council, including other income sources available and then the level of the service offered by each council. But nevertheless, I guess this will help us to get a general understanding. So as we can see, we have the lowest rate in G21 region. And the conclusion will be the same for any value that we may select, as generally there is a linear relationship between rates and the property valuation. Waste management charges. What we have in place is full cost recovery waste service. And we will identify 2 main waste service types in our budget from 22-23 onward. Standard curbside waste, which includes landfill, recycling, organics, and in the future we will add glass collection as well to this service. And then the usual public waste service. As we know, we have fixed charges for these waste service types. Standard curbside waste management expenses. So there is a 140,000 increase, or 16.9% increase in total curbside waste management expenses. This is mainly due to the cost associated with the curbside transition project. If we only compare operational cost, we project 4.2% reduction in operational cost for 22-23, largely driven by the projected savings in landfill levy due to forgo waste service. The council has decided to phase out the recovery of cost associated with the curbside transition project. And as a result, The standard curbside fixed charge for 22 will not increase by 16.9%. Our manager, infrastructure and environment, will shortly speak to us about this curbside transition project. Public waste management expenses, we only see just over 5,600 increase for 22-23. Right. In this slide, we can see how those expenses have been translated into individual fixed waste charges. There is a $9.30 increase in fixed curbside waste charge and $4.20 increase in fixed public waste charges for 22-23. If council had not phased out the recovery of that curbside transition cost, the increase in the fixed curbside waste management charges for next year would have been $60. Anyway, as a result, the residential property and a tourist accommodation property will pay an extra $13.50 for waste charges in 22-23, because residential and tourist accommodation properties has to pay standard curbside waste as well as public waste. A commercial or the vacant land will pay an extra $4.20 in 22-23. Right. What we can see here, the fixed waste management charges payable by a residential property in each municipality within G21. So based on the draft budget that is available now, the COLAC has the lowest fixed waste management charge. Our total fixed charge is lower than that of Geelong and the Surf Coast. Right. Earlier, we selected a property valued 1 million and compared rate payable in each municipality. In the previous slide, we saw fixed waste charges of each council within G21. Now, let's look at what you will have to pay to each council in total if you have a property valued 1 million. In Bara, you will pay 1,892 as rates and waste management charges for 22-23 if you have a property valued 1 million. For a 1 million property, you will have to pay 2,140 to Surf Coast Council, almost $250 more than what you pay here. In Geelong, you will pay almost $450 more for a 1 million property. So that means still we have the lowest rates and waste management charges within G21 region relative to property values. Right, let's move on to operating expenses. Our operating expense budget is 12.5 million for 22-23. 40% is employee cost, another 46% is material and services, 11% depreciation. So what we see here, 92,000 or as a percentage, 0.7% increase compared to 21-22 forecast. However, direct comparison with the current year forecast is not giving an accurate picture. So if you take the depreciation alone, there is a 83,000 increase compared to 21-22. So let's look at the movement in key expense items. Employee cost. So this is an extract from the note 3.6 that you can find on the page 41 of the draft budget. We need to be careful when we try to interpret movement in the cost and the FTE numbers as shown in this note, because temporary staff vacancies we have for 21-22 have understated the estimates for 21-22. Right. I have selected two examples to explain this better. These are not new positions. right? So these are the positions we have considered in the organization structure that we use for the current year budget. At the time of finalizing the budget, we have made some assumptions. So we have assumed that we will have a vegetation and foreshore coordinator recruited by beginning of April 22. That means someone will work in this role for 3 months in the current financial year and 12 months in the next financial year. In terms of FT estimate, 0.25 FTs for current year and 1 FT for the next year. The same way, we have assumed that we will have a contract officer recruited by the beginning of May, meaning someone to work on this role for 2 months for the current financial year, 12 months for the next financial year. In terms of the FT estimate, 0.2 FTs for the current year, 1 FT for the next year. So if we take these two positions alone, we have estimated 0.45 FTs for the current year and 2 FTs for the next financial year. So we have a couple of more cases like this. So as we know, the FT estimate reflect the staff effort, and the employee cost is the monetary value of that staff effort. So if this is the case, you may wonder, okay, what's the right comparison? Right. A comparison with the current year budget will give us a more accurate picture, as we have included full FT effort when finalizing the current year budget. So when we compare with the current year budget, we will see a reduction in FT estimate for the next year. In fact, we have reduced 1.3 FTs from our structure. The net increase in the employee cost compared to the current year, the adopted budget is 109,000. As a percentage, 2.2%, which is even lower than the minimum combined increase due to EBA and super guarantee, which is 2.5%. Though we have not created any new positions in the structure as such, since we have got the current year budget adopted, there have been some changes that we have made to the organizational structure. So we removed newly created municipal health and well-being officer position from the organizational structure. So we have restructured our aged care team. We have restructured our planning team, converting a part-time planner to a senior planner and replacing the contract planner with a casual planner and so on. We have made some changes to the finance team. And again, we have made some changes to our corporate service team as well. So if we take the impact of the EBA super guarantee increase out, there is a 9,000 reduction in staff cost as a result of those changes we have made to the organizational structure since the last budget. Again, you can find all these details on page 57 and 58 of the draft budget. Material and services. We know material and services account for 46% of our total operating expenses. If we directly compare against the forecast for the current year, we see 350,000 reduction in 22-23 expenses. However, again, this does not give us a more accurate picture, because if in this case, 21-22 expenses are overstated due to costs associated with the one-off grant funded project. And we had quite a lot in the current year. So let's take out one-off operating expenses and even the waste management expenses for a better comparison, because we have included waste management expenses as well in this material and services, because that's the way we have to report it. So if we take one-off expenses as well as waste management expenses out for a better comparison, this is what we will see. the forecasted recurrent expenses in the draft budget against the forecasted recurrent expenses for the forecast. So what we can see, a reduction of 68,000 in recurrent material and services against the current year forecast. Right. Here, we see a comparison of the recurrent material and services between the draft budget for 22-23 and adopted budget for the current year. We do not see any growth in recurrent material and services compared to the current budget. Again, you can find more details on page 59 and 60 of the draft budget about material and services. Right. Earlier we saw there's only 109,000 increase in the employee cost in the draft budget compared to the current year adopted budget. No increase in recurrent material and services in the draft budget compared to the current year budget. These two categories account for 86% of our operating expenses for 22-23. So in my opinion, this alone demonstrates, despite current economic challenges, the council's adaptability and sound financial discipline. Right. Now we know our total operating expense budget for 22-23, which is 12.5 million. If you take the depreciation out, it is a cash operating expense budget of 11 million. Again, you may wonder why we spend 11 million a year. The services offered by the council are determined mainly by three factors. First, government obligations, services that council is obligated to deliver. Second, government agreement, services that council deliver under a formal agreement with another tier of the government. And third, council discretion, services that council decide to deliver in response to an identified community need. Now, if we try to relate total cash expense of 11 million to these service determines, this is what you would see. Out of 11 million, we spend almost 7.2 million to discharge various legislative requirements, which accounts for 65% of our total cash operating expenses. Another 2.4 million due to various agreements the council has with other government agencies. That leaves 1.6 million. Just 14% of the total cash operating expenses where council will have full control. Capital expenditure, there are 3.8 million capital projects in the draft budget, mainly capital work carried over from the current year. RCU has already spoken about these capital projects. Loans, as I mentioned, no new loans are included in the draft budget. Council will continue to have a debt-free balance sheet. Cash and investment, because cash is the king. Cash and investment are expected to decrease by 2.7 million during the year to 7.6 million as council delivers on project allocation, especially the capital project. But still, council will have a healthy cash balance by the end of 22-23. Right. Finally, the question that you may ask, are we financially sustainable? We use financial sustainability indicators specified in our council plan to assess financial sustainability of our operation. Again, we have provided all details about these indicators, how we calculate, how do we interpret all of those information on page 14 and 15 of our draft budget. Further, along with the draft budget, we have updated our financial plan as well, because it is more meaningful when these indicators are judged over a medium to longer term rather than the result for one particular year. Right. If you look at the draft budget for 22-23, it satisfies all financial sustainability indicators specified in the council plan, except for underlying result. Again, okay, what is this underlying result? So this is a simple way I can explain it. It checks whether we will have ongoing income into the foreseeable future. We are not looking at the next year, into the foreseeable future, to manage our operations and to meet our asset renewal demand. Theoretically, we assume our depreciation reflects our asset renewal demand in this calculation. The draft budget projects an underlying deficit of 343,000 for 22-23. You may wonder whether we are in trouble. Don't worry, that's not the case. So as I mentioned earlier, we should not look at the result of a 1 year and make a decision about the financial sustainability. So we need to look into the medium to longer term to make a decision. Right. As per our updated financial plan, we are looking at an average 152,000 deficit for each year for next 10 years. But what we can see is a improving trend. If I put that into a different perspective, even not really closer to 10% of our depreciation, that average deficit that we are looking at the moment. This is mainly due to loss of income from boat ramp parking fees, and again from tourist park due to anticipated closure of some site. And again, additional operating cost, depreciation associated with upgraded and new assets. Again, there are some unknowns. There may be some opportunities for council to achieve operational efficiencies and additional ongoing income as a result of the ongoing project. However, details are not available at this point in time for us to quantify those opportunities and bring those into our financial plan. Again, as I mentioned, what we see here is not a significant deficit for us to start worrying about. However, we need to keep this trend in our mind when we make decisions, especially that will result in new or additional ongoing commitment. If I summarize the financial sustainability based on what we just looked at it, our current financial plan indicates that we do not have more capacity to absorb additional ongoing commitment or new ongoing commitment unless those are backed by additional ongoing income. So that is something we had to keep in our mind when we make decisions moving forward. So with that note, I'll stop here. So I'll now hand it over to our manager in infrastructure and environment, Stuart Hansen, to talk about curbside transition project. Thank you.
Thank you, Gihan, and good evening to the people of the audience and those watching at home. 22-23 financial year will see the introduction of the FOGO curbside service. I've been given the opportunity to present a very short presentation on the service. I'll give you a bit of an explanation of what FOGO is, why we want to introduce the new service, and how we're going to do that. So the FOGO service is an acronym for Food Organic, Garden Organic. So FOGO is essentially all the material that's able to be composted that's currently in your red-lidded landfill bin. It includes food scraps, meat, vegetable peelings, bread, dairy leftovers. We want to divert these items from landfill because these materials, when they break down in the landfill environment, create methane, lots of it. It's a harmful greenhouse gas, and that's bad. So introducing the FOGO service is a key action to achieve the council plan's environment portfolio's priority 2, which is respond to the impacts of climate change and reduce carbon emissions through the climate emergency response plan. And obviously that then leads to the CERP, or the climate emergency response plan. And under the consumption and waste pillar action 1, we have the introduction of 4-bin waste and recycling collection system. FOGO is a really important part of that system. The 4-bin system's a system that's effectively required under the state government's new Circular Economy Act. So the state government certainly supporting and pushing this initiative also. On average, 1,024 tonnes of residential waste is being taken to landfill each year from the borough residents. So 40% of the landfill bin contents could be diverted from landfill. So it's 40% of that bin is organic matter, whether that be green waste that's not going to the green bin or food waste. So we'd like to divert it for landfill for a number of reasons. Currently, the landfill levy, which is applied to every tonne of waste that goes to landfill, is increasing at a rapid rate. In 2021 financial year, the landfill levy was $65.90 per tonne. In the 22-23 year, it'll be $125.90 per tonne. So the diversion of this organic material really has an economic benefit too, and a large one. So how are we going to divert this material? So to facilitate the collection and diversion of the organic material, we'll undergo a transition of our curbside service. You can see, I'll just use my little pointer device so everyone can see. On the left side of the screen, we've got our current curbside collection service. We collect our waste in a 120 litre bin weekly, along with our recyclables in a 120 litre bin weekly. Fortnightly, on a Friday, we'll collect a 240 litre garden organics bin. That was introduced in 2015 with great success. We've managed to increase our diversion rate of material from landfill remarkably through that period. In August 2022, which is our target date for commencing the FOGO service, the service will transition to a weekly food and organics bin, so a FOGO bin. That bin will be collected weekly. So that bin will still accept your green waste, but also all your food and meal scraps, vegetable peelings, etc. To help facilitate this collection, we're increasing the size of the recyclables bin to a 240 litre bin, be collected fortnightly, and on alternating fortnights, we'll be collecting the landfill bin. So the landfill bin will contain the residual inert material that can't be recycled or composted. The curbside transition service provides really an increase in service. The existing fortnightly volume that we collect from the curbside from each house is 720 under the standard offerings, and under the new system, we offer an 840 litre fortnightly offering. So the operational changes and avoided landfill taxes from the implementation of this new service over the next 5 years will result in a saving of, on average, $85,000 compared to continuing with the status quo model. So there's a real financial incentive as well as the environmental. The capital cost for the transition, as Gihan explained before, will be spread over a 5-year period with the aim of containing increases to the waste management charges to 3.1% annually for this period. As I said before, Council's target date to commence the FOGO collection is the 1st of August. An extensive education program will commence. So we've commenced an awareness program, and as we get closer to the rollout of the new bins, an education campaign will help the community in this transition by providing that information on how to use the bins and that system correctly. So with that, I'll hand over to Connor Parker, the coordinator for communications coordinator, for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I barely remember my own title anyway, so that makes 2 of us. Let me just stop sharing the screen so the people at home can see all your lovely faces. So now we move on to the most exciting part of the evening, the Q&A. Now, we haven't received any questions online. Do we have any questions for any of our panelists from the audience? An opportunity to grill your boss? No? Yes. David, what question would you like to ask? Yep, if you ask them one by one, what I'll do is I'll repeat them into the microphone so the people at home can hear them, and then I'll send them off to a panelist. So what's your first question? Thanks, David. So for those at home, the question was about the comparison of rating rates between G21 properties, specifically that $1 million valuation, and whether it was fair to say that the Borough of Queenscliff had a higher proportion of $1 million properties compared to some of those other councils. Gihan, would you say that's a fair comparison?
Thank you for that question, David. Yes, if you look at 1 million, it is closer to if you look at the property values, it's closer to the properties that will fall within, we call it 50th percentile. So yes, we would have more properties which would come closer to 1 million compared to other G21 councils. But always we had to compare our rates relative to the property value, because we use property value to distribute. So as a result, where we have a better comparison when you compare rates against the property value.
Great. Thanks, Gihan.
If I answer, in my opinion, it's not a meaningless, because I think that's the most accurate way to compare rates, because depending on the value of the properties, you calculate that rate in the dollar. So that rate in the dollar reflect the relative value of the overall property portfolio when you compare against each council. So.
Okay, thanks, Gihan. David, your next question.
Just in relation to the new assets that we've taken forward to the public and the associated appreciation, does that impact on the underlying deficit?
Thanks. So the question for those at home was about depreciation of new assets that council is acquiring. Does that impact our underlying deficit? Gihan.
Thank you again for that question. The short answer, yes. Whenever we have a new asset, especially, it will have additional depreciation, and not only depreciation, and again, additional operating expenses. So it impacts our underlying result. But in the draft budget, we have already factored those additional depreciation, additional operating expenses of the current, those new assets, as well as other assets that we are going to get significantly upgraded. Those have been factored, where we have to be careful. If you're going to have more and more new assets, then our current financial plan indicates we may see some challenges.
So I'll ask Martin this question. The question is that there was an assumption for the questioner that Better Boating Victoria would subsidise the loss of parking fees at the boat ramp following the upgrade. Is that our understanding, Martin?
Yes, it is, Connor, and thank you, Dave, for your question. So this will be the last financial year, last year was the last financial year received funds to compensate for the loss of car parking fees. So we're in discussions and we're trying to encourage ongoing contribution, but this is the last formal contribution.
Thanks, Martin. David, did you have any other questions?
One relates to why is council financing offence on the beach? Isn't that dealt with?
So the question is, why is council financing a fence on the beach? I believe this relates to the fence on Narrows Beach in the Capital Works projects. Isn't this a Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning responsibility? I suppose, Martin.
I'm happy to try that. Thank you again, Dave, for the question. Yes and no. So I guess that DELP would consider it to be a shared responsibility, but certainly they would, as for instance, they have with the rock wall improvements at Point Lonsdale, they've funded those works. So it may be the case that they end up funding the timber fence, but council really, as I suggested, it's a contingency in case there isn't any funding available, and that's indication to me at the moment there's no funding available in this financial year. But hopefully in future years, following the report that's been commissioned by DELP, there is some funding there.
Thank you very much, Martin. David, anything else?
Struggling to comprehend the budget costing initially for the budget started way up for down in the hostel side, then got transferred over to coastal management plan. There was also a loud proclamation about consultants coming on board, but it seems like native for the undertaking plan. It's understood that guidelines were published by DELP in 2017 to is the plan produced an admission of failure of the plan currently was produced and councillors see more effectiveness?
So I'll do my best to summarise that multi-part question relating to the coastal marine management plan. Effectively, the question asked was about the source of those funds, whether consultants would be employed, and a bit of an overview on our expectations for the plan. Martin, I suspect you again are the best one to answer this one.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question, David, and it's a complicated one. So in my first month as the CEO of the borough, I met with DELP, and at that meeting, it was made clear to me that the expectation was that council produced a CMMP. It was also made clear to me that the guidelines for that version were going to be updated. They've now been updated and we have draft guidelines for the 2022. And so the work that we're now going to have to produce need to relate to that 2022 guidelines. With respect to getting a consultant on board, a project manager is probably a different role to a consultant. So we're not getting someone in to tell us how to write the report or to bring technical expertise. What we're bringing in is someone to coordinate what we hope will be a steering group made up of community members, councillors, and then dragging some of the experts in when necessary, because the guidelines now require additional reporting and investigations to be undertaken. So we're still working through the structure of how that looks, but you know, as officers, we were frustrated because we were riding blind in many aspects. But what we did show that DELP was supported before it went on community consultation last year. So it's a moving feast, and I think the investment, the 210 will be might not all be expended, but it's there in case, as we go through those guidelines, we need to do additional work to get it up to the standard that state's now expecting.
Great. Thank you, Martin. I do note we've just crossed over 7:30. Did you have one more short one? Mhm. Okay, so the question was about the assumption about 2% wage increases. I'm not sure how much Martin can discuss an ongoing EBA negotiation, but I will throw that one to him.
Unfortunately, I can't discuss it, but yes, obviously we've looked at the rate capping, we've looked at the long-term forecasts for inflation by the state government, which is slightly different from the Fed, and that's what we're hoping we can put on the table, and we're hoping it will be accepted by our staff.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry, $1 million to Point Lonsdale. Can you clarify? Point Lonsdale Lighthouse. So the question was about the Victorian government giving $1 million to the Point Lonsdale Lighthouse project.
Yes.
Who's going to oversee that one, Martin?
So far, I have received a text from an officer in DELP or RDV to tell me that the money's there. No other correspondence. So we weren't made aware that that was being considered, and we weren't made aware that we've received it. So we'll have to wait and see. The assumption will be that they'll ask us to manage it, but that's a decision for council at the time. Yep.
Great. Thanks very much, Martin. And thank you very much, David, for your enthusiasm in the budget. I'm glad that's what we hold them for. So for you, for anyone else in the audience, or for anyone watching at home, we're always happy to answer your questions on the budget at any time. So if you do have a question, if you walk out and there is something else you would like to ask, you can always contact council in writing by emailing info@queenscliff.vic.gov.au or writing to us via post using the contact information on our website. Now, we also are interested not just in your questions, but in your suggestions for the budget. We are interested in hearing submissions, public feedback. Consultation is a really important part of everything we do here at the Borough of Queenscliff, and that includes our budget and our financial plans. If you would like to make a submission, and that submission can be as short as a few sentences or a longer, more detailed submission, you can also make that submission in writing before 4 p.m. on Monday, the 23rd of May. If you forget that date, don't worry, it's on our website, queenscliff.vic.gov.au. You can make a submission in writing to us by email or by post before the 4 p.m. on Monday, the 23rd of May. We are looking forward very much to hearing your feedback. With that, that's all from us for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. If you're here in person or if you are watching online, you can view a recording of tonight's session as many times as you would like on our Facebook page, where it will remain in perpetuity. Thank you everyone very much for joining us, and have a good evening.